Okay, welcome to August 18th on Joe's Daily U.S. History Lesson. It is I, your host, Joseph DeCristoforo. And for the next 5 minutes, I'll talk about America. The good, the bad, and the ugly. I put together the show from a tool shed in my backyard in America's finest city, San Diego. If you're looking to move here, or if you do live here but have any questions about real estate investments or refinancing, check out TeresaLovesRealEstate.com and then give her a call at 619-507-4906. And let's begin the show as we customarily do with the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's everybody stand up and face the flags if we have one. Put our right hands over our hearts and begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen, brothers and sisters. And now on to today's headlines. Operation Starlight. Plus, Washington signs Jay's Treaty. A sea serpent is seen from Maine. TV game shows are checked for scrutiny. James Meredith becomes the first African American to graduate from Ole Miss. And I'll talk about the longest game at Wrigley Field. All right, so now let's do this. 1965. Operation Starlight begins in Van Tuong Peninsula, the first major U.S. ground battle of the Vietnam War. Lieutenant General Lewis W. Waltz v. Nguyen Chon. The results? Both sides claim victory, even though 5,500 Marines destroyed a Viet Cong stronghold. The U.S. Marines sustained 45 killed and 200 wounded. Corporal Robert O'Malley and Lance Corporal Joe C. Paul received the Medal of Honor for their engagement in the operation. 1795. Washington signs Jay's Treaty, or the Treaty of Amity, Commerce, and Navigation between His Britannic Majesty and the United States of America for short. Yeah. It was negotiated by Supreme Court Chief Justice John Jay and signed between the United States and Great Britain on November 19th, 1794. There were three big problems left unresolved after the end of the American Revolution. For one thing, the Brits were still occupying forts in New York and present-day Ohio and Michigan. Second, the boundary between the U.S. and Canada was still a bit ambiguous. Third, the British were aggravating the Native American attacks on settlers in present-day Kentucky and Ohio. And there were other issues left unresolved from the Treaty of Paris, including the fact that merchants in America and the Caribbean wanted the British to be reopened to American trade, Southern politicians wanted to be paid for slaves that were evacuated by the British Army during the war, and various other issues. Meanwhile, there were still high tensions between Great Britain and France. In America, Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson supported France, and Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton and Chief Justice John Jay supported the UK. President Washington sided with the latter. Since the last thing Washington wanted was another war with the British, Jay and Hamilton worked together to form a treaty that would both alleviate bad relations with Great Britain and guarantee increased trade between the UK and the US. The Americans didn't have a lot of leverage, except for maybe joining the Danish and the Swedish and refusing to accept their goods, if forced by necessary. Not much of an ace in the pocket, and the British wouldn't go for it. In fact, it just gave them even more rights. The only way the treaty helped America was by opening a little bit more trade with the UK and the surrender of northwestern ports, which, by the way, was already addressed in the original treaty in 1783. That's it! No paying Americans back the debt of the Revolution, no Canadian borders, no slaves, and no guarantees that the British would not hassle American ships. As you can imagine, this was highly unpopular in America. But Washington went with it, believing that this would keep America out of future hostilities with the British. 1817. Gloucester, Massachusetts newspaper tells of wild sea serpent seen offshore. The story was big enough to send the Linnean Society of New England to investigate. It was a 100-foot-long, large-eyed, sharp-toothed, scaly reptilian beast. But enough about my ex-girlfriend. Getting back to the snake. Although there are sightings to this day, the whole sea serpent myth has been debunked. 1958. American TV game shows are investigated for scandalous activity. The three main game shows were 21 Questions, Dato, and the $64,000 question. On 21 Questions, contestant Herb Stempel allowed his opponent to win the game, going in on the profits. Once this was brought out into the open, networks started canceling entire quiz show lineups. 2 years later, Congress amended the Communication Act of 1934 to prohibit fixing of game shows. 1963. James Meredith becomes the first African American to graduate from Ole Miss. Meredith grew up on a farm with 9 brothers and sisters. He joined the Air Force after graduating high school and then attended Jackson State College, an all-black school. Then he became the first black student at the University of Mississippi under the protection of armed guards. After he graduated, Meredith got a law degree and got into politics. He continues to be an activist to this day. Imagine, back then, Meredith wasn't even allowed to go onto the school. Now, there's a statue of him there like a boss! James Meredith, everybody. And finally, in 1982, longest baseball game at Wrigley Field in Chicago ends after 22 innings before the LA Dodgers beat the Cubs 2-1. The game had actually started on August 17th.
All right, so that's going to wrap it up for August 18th on Joe's Daily U.S. History Lesson. Once again, I'm your host, Joseph DeCristoforo. Take a look at the website, joesdailyushistorylesson.com. Let me know what you thought about today's program. For instance, what's your take on Jay's Treaty? What about that sea serpent off the coast of Maine? Have you ever seen anything like it? Yeah, me neither. Have you ever seen the game show $64,000 question? So yeah, let me know what your take is on that and more. You can also try some of the multiple choice quizzes while you're on the website. Let me know how you do with those. It's okay, I'm not going to grade you. And don't miss tomorrow's program. We'll wish a happy birthday to Bill Clinton, plus the CIA stage a coup d'etat in Iran. So don't miss that. In the meantime, you can catch me on Facebook and Twitter. My Twitter handle is JDUSHL. So until then, thanks for listening, everyone, and thanks for being great patriotic Americans. See you then.